Hi, welcome to another weekly session, and today's session will be filled with many interesting topics. To start and begin the session with, I'll begin the session with unit architecture, how you can understand what unit architecture is and how it is built. And once you implement unit architecture along with me, with how and observe how I'm implementing, you will observe the real importance and the flexibility which is provided with the help of functional APIs. Before we begin, please do hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Do hit the like button. Share with your friends, the data science friends you have, the colleagues, everybody. All right, let's begin. So, yeah, let's do the necessary imports. Once we are done with this, this is the official paper, and this is the architecture. I won't be reading through the official paper and the architecture, but yeah. So more or less, this is what it is. You have the input image. It goes through a sequential path. So this is the structure is U, but and the U structure is for a better understanding. So basically what it is sequentially going straight and straight. This is entirely straight path, and in between you have different kind of skip connections. Like in ResNets we had. Similarly, here in units we have a skip connection or the merging which happens. So let's see how it goes. So this particular path does the contraction of the features, and the other part is for the expansion. So unit architecture is basically for started from biomedical images. So what you had is the input image and the corresponding masks, right? So input image, and anywhere if you have an input image and a corresponding mask is what you need to find out, then unit is the best architecture to proceed with. How unit evolved? It evolved from autoencoders, but we won't start with autoencoders. We will discuss unit first, and we might discuss autoencoder at a later stage. And I think unit is more intuitive than autoencoders to understand and grasp. For me it was. For me it definitely was more intuitive and easier to understand than the autoencoders part. But if you want, you can understand autoencoders as well, not an issue. So one thing I would like to share, like this is how the architecture is. This is your input image. This is a convolution layer. This arrow are convolution. Then it goes through down max pooling. So max pooling is used for your decreasing the size, and nothing else, nothing much. Let's begin. And the convolutions are unpadded, I guess. Unpadded convolutions, 3 cross 3. So let's implement. I think once we begin implementing, the things will get more clear. So alright, first we have an input image. Input equals to tf keras layers dot input. So let's see, input images 572 cos 572. And channel is 1. Alright. Then we have this blue arrow. Blue arrow means convolution 3 cross 3 with ReLU. So I would name it as, this would be my convolution 1. TF keras layers dot convolution 2 dimensional, 64 units. Kernel size is 3. Strides is 1. Activation is ReLU. Unpadded, that means the default padding, and I think this is perfect. We can do kernel initializer as H uniform. It's not mandatory, it's an optional thing. It's not mentioned anywhere in the paper. I hope so. I have not read it completely. I hope so, but it's a good practice to mention the kernel initializer as HE initializer, Xavier initializer, whatever it is. So passing the input, we are done through the part 1 once more. Convolution 1. Let's check how much have we proceeded. 568, 568, 64, 568, 568, 64. Perfect. Now we have a max pooling 2 cross 2. Now this would be used at much later stage. At a much later stage, this would be reused. So we need to now change the name. Convolution 2. This would be convolution 2, which is obtained using. Before this happens, let's say pool 1 would be equal to TF Keras layers dot max pool 2D, and the filter is 2 cross 2. Perfect. Now let's print pool 1 shape. Two 84, 64. 284, 284, 64. Perfect. Now we have conv2. Conv2 would be TF Keras layers convolution 2 dimensional 128 3 activation equals relu kernel initializer equals HE uniform. We have pool 1 over here. This operation is repeated, and we have TF Keras layers convolution 2 dimensional 128 3 activation as relu kernel initializer equal to HE uniform convolution 2 dimensional. Right, this would be reused again over here. So now we need to have pooling with a different name. We'll do as pool 2 convolution Keras. So if you don't change the name, what would happen? So we won't be able to access this particular layer, right? If we keep using x, so if the constant remains the same, if the variable name remains the same, you won't be able to access any particular layer. To access any particular layer, you need to have a different variable name. This is very obvious and intuitive. Now we have done pooling 2. Let's check the shape. One 128. Perfect. Now we will have convolution 3. It would be similar with higher number of filters, 256. So the number of filters is also as a pattern. It increases, then it decreases, and the dimensionality also decreases, then it expands. That's how it is. 256 3 activation equals relu kernel initializer equal to HE uniform pool 2 conv3 equals TF Keras layers convolution 2 dimensional 256 3 activation equals relu kernel initializer equal HE uniform convolution 3. 68, 68, 256, and the last one would be this one, convolution 4. I think this is the second last one. Second last one is DF Keras layers convolution 2-dimensional 512 3 activation equals ReLU kernel initializer equals HE uniform tool 3 convolution 4 TF Keras layers convolution 2-dimensional 5123 activation equals ReLU kernel initializer equals HE uniform convolution 4 32 32 512 32 32 512. Now we have two more operations. 1024 filters convolution 5 TF Keras layers convolution 2-dimensional 1024 3 activation equals ReLU kernel initializer we are till here and it should be 2828 cross 1024. This is the straight and straightforward simple method. Now comes the complexity. 2828 1024, we are done with the half part. Now the other half is where the real action comes into picture, right? So we will be doing upconv 2D. Now this upconv 2D I read in the paper, it happens by doing a convolution on top of upsampling. Upsampling every first step in the expansive path consists of upsampling the feature map followed by a 2x2 convolution, which is up convolution, not convolution 2D transpose. Convolution 2D transpose is specifically used in GANs. Do not confuse this. I have seen multiple implementations using up convolution 2D transpose. That is absolutely not the right way. If you can obtain the right output, but the way the architecture defines is the official architecture defines is by upsampling then a convolution. That can also be done, and you can obtain architecture, you can do something or the other to obtain the similar outputs, but that is not how it is. And I've seen many of the implementations which have done here padding equal to same. Do not do that. It is specifically written, it is specifically mentioned that it is unpadded convolutions. If it is an unpadded convolution, you need not to do padding equal to same. Right? These are just few words of caution. Now we have up convolution 2D. So it would be up 1 TF Keras layers upsampling followed by a convolution. Alright. Two filters. I think filters is 1024 filters, and kernel size is 2, activation equals relu. Yeah, where were we? Yeah, also remember that at any part of the layer, at any part of the level, the number of filters will be corresponding to this. So here also 512, 512, and 512 concatenates with 512, it becomes 1024, right? So here the number of filters would not be 1024, it would be 512. What we have over here is convolution. We will have the output, we will apply two up convolutions. So let's do the up part. Up sampling, two dimensional, 2 cross 2 sampling. This 2 cross 2 upsampling happens on convolution 5, which is followed by a convolution 2 dimensional. Now we have obtained up 1. This is the up 1. This is the up 1, which would then be concatenated with a cropped part of this. If you see, there are dotted lines over here, here, here. If you read about it, it's a copy and crop. So crop in accordance that it becomes 56, 56. That you need to match the dimensions. So if you want to reduce 64 to 56, you would have to trim 4 from both ends, which means you need to trim 8. 8 by 2 is 4, 4 from both ends. So it would be crop 1 would be equal to tf keras layers dot cropping 2d 4 comma 4 on the layer of, this layer is convolution 4, this layer is convolution 4 on convolution 4. Finally, these two would be merged in the order of cropping first, then the upsampling part, which I would call as merge 1 as tf keras layers dot concatenate crop 1 up 1 x is equals to minus 1. We have completed till here. Now let us proceed to convolution 3 cross 3 and relu. This would be my convolution 6 tf keras layers convolution 2 dimensional. Number of filters is 512. Then we have 3 activation as relu, kernel initializer as he uniform. This happens on merge 1. This is again repeated on convolution 6. this is carried forward, the upsampling. Let's do the necessary changes. It would be upsampling 2, wherein 512 by 2 would be 256. And this part of the convolution would be from convolution 4. Cropping 2 would be happening on convolution 4, wherein convolution 4 was 136, which needs to be changed to 104, which is a difference of 32. 32 by 2 is 16, so it would be 16 cross 16. 16 needs to be trimmed from both the ends. Once it is done, we will obtain our merge 2, which will be the concatenation of crop 2 and up 2. Proceeding forward, we have again 2 convolutions, which I would name as convolution 7, each with 256 filters. Here we have merge 2, here we have convolution 7. This again goes through an upsampling process, which I would call as upsampling 3, wherein the number of effective filters would be 256 by 2, which is 128. Upsampling would happen on upsampling would happen on convolution 6. How did I do this wrong? Upsampling would happen on convolution 6. Here upsampling would happen on convolution 7. Upsampling would happen on convolution 7. And the cropping would happen on convolution 3. Cropping would happen on convolution 3. This is the third part. This is convolution 3, this is convolution 4, this is convolution 5. This is convolution 6, 7. This is convolution 5. This is 4, this is 6, this is 3, this is 7, did I miss something? Okay. So this was till here, it was convolution 5, convolution 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Till here we are good. Then we had our first upsampling, which was making it 512. We did the merge, concatenate, and then we had our convolution 6. Then we had upsampling again, which it was 256, crop, concatenate. First upsampling happened on convolution 5, second upsampling would happen on convolution 6, next would happen on convolution 7. Yeah. So where were we? First happened, now second happens, convolution 256. 256 cropping done, everything done, merge 2 done. Then we have this 256, now we are here, convolution 7. Now we are going to convolution 8, but before that happens, we have to do upsampling, wherein upsampling would be 128. This happens, upsampling would happen on convolution 7, and the concatenation would happen on convolution 2. So here it would have been convolution 3. Now it is figured out. It is convolution 4, convolution 3, convolution 3. Now it would be convolution 2, cropping, convolution 2. And the dimensions would be, here it is 280, it needs to be chopped off to 200, which means 80 or 40. 80 by 2 is 40. This is now merge 3, it would be crop 3, upsampling 3. This is perfect. We have crop 3, upsampling 3, we have our merge 3. Once we have our merge 3, we would have to do 2 more convolutions, which we would be calling as convolution 8. With number of filters as 128 and 128, it would be merge 3, then it would be convolution 8. Final and last layer would be having another upsampling, wherein it would be upsampling 4 with the number of filters as 128 by 2. Reason being 128 by 2 is this one contributes to the half of it, other half comes from the copy and paste, right? So that is why 128 by 2 or whatever it was by 2. Now we have upsampling 2, which is happening on this particular layer, which is convolution 8. You have obtained the upsampling part. Once you have obtained the upsampling part, you need to figure out where to crop from. Cropping would happen from convolution 1. How much? It was 568, which needs to be converted to 392. A difference of 568 minus 392 is 176 by 2 is 88. So we need over here a cropping of 88 on both the ends. Once that is done, we would have crop 4 and up 4. Following this, we have 2 convolutions, which I call it convolution 9. With the number of filters as 64, merge 4, convolution 9. Finally, you will have a convolution 1 cross 1. Finally, you would have a convolution of TF Keras layers convolution 2-dimensional with number of filters as 2, because you need black and white segmentation output mask, right? Number of filters as 2, and 1 cross 1 should be the filter activation. I don't know. Kernel initializer equals HG uniform convolution 9. Let's figure out the activation once and for all. Model would be equal to TF Keras models dot model inputs equals to input, right? Input outputs equals to output model name or let it be, let's not keep the model name, is more than sufficient. 1 cross 1 1 cross 1 is at a final layer 1 cross 1 is used to map the feature of 64 this, so we don't get to know this path. Hopefully there's no activation over here. So we have a problem at merge 1. What is merge 1 talking about? Up 1 is something and convolution 1 is something else. Convolution 1 is providing, so let's see the shapes. What are the shapes? Print up 1 dot shape, print crop 1 dot shape. Up 1 is 55, 55, 56, 56 is crop. Crop is as expected. Up 1 is not as expected. So upsampling would happen on this convolution. What about now? Yeah. Here we need padding equals to same. And this is what the unit architecture is. So you can see the U shape. It is happening like this. This is the U. If you, I hope you can able to understand the U. This is the U happening. This is the U happening. This is the unit. We finally obtained our unit architecture. Hope this was clear. Let's move on to our next topic. If any doubt, please let me know. And this is the best, this is the official, this is next to the official implementation. The official implementation is in Caffe, but let's do the TensorFlow implementation. This is the TensorFlow implementation. We could have utilized this in a module by using convolution unit, but I wanted you to understand, because had I used those steps, you would not be able to grasp the concept. So I wanted to let's do it a bit more. It might take 10 more minutes, but you would understand the topic in a better manner. So this is whenever you have any input and you want to find out, you are given the mask anywhere, no matter what the domain is, medical, non-medical, technical, automobile. So in automobile you have canvas data set. For medical you have the biomedical images data set. For anything you have the person data set. So if it's a person and the corresponding mask, face and the corresponding mask, this is the background removal, anything. This is the best way to proceed. Let's move on to the next topic. Before we do that, please ensure that you hit the subscribe button and like and share with your friends. Yeah. Now let us talk about batch normalization. This is something I wanted to discuss. And so we'll be discussing in and out, not in and out. So that would definitely take a lot of time, but the major overview of what batch normalization provides and what it is and how it can help in your model training and why it is widely used. So what are the different, how to tackle batch normalization, where to place batch normalization, when fine-tuning or pre-training or using transfer learning, should you use batch normalization weights, or what to do, what not to do. So those are the things we want to discuss in this next part of the session. So as you can see, this is the official paper of batch normalization, accelerating deep neural network training by reducing the internal covariance shift. this was the idea. So the main things you would hear while reading this paper of batch normalization is internal covariance shift, and how batch normalization tackles internal covariance shift with the help of its method. So what exactly is internal covariance shift? So the paper talks about like when you are training the network. So for one batch, you have one kind of data. If the distribution changes, the data distribution changes. So thereby it causes a drastic change in the weights of the layers. Added to it, there is an inter-layered dependency between layers and layers. So this particular paper, the original paper, what the original paper talks about is the internal covariance shift. What is internal covariance shift as per the paper is the outputs observed by there are multiple hidden layers, right? So outputs which the one particular hidden layer is generating would observe a huge shift when the distribution of the input data changes. So this tries to do internal covariance shift, and that is what they call as internal covariance shift, and how they manage it with the help of calculating batch statistics. So batch statistics are used and utilized to calculate and to counter the effect of internal covariance shift. So what you have is batch mean, you have batch variance, then you try to normalize, and thereby you do the scaling and shifting so as to obtain the final parameters which would be needed. Right. Now what we have next is this is the algorithm. And there was something I wanted to share, that there are two trainable parameters, which is gamma and beta, right? So these are the two trainable parameters, gamma and beta, and may further compose with the scaling factor by gamma and shifting by beta to yield a single linear transform that replaces batch neural network X. So that is what the major idea is. Then there's a question and argument. So we will not get into the mathematics. Majorly what it does is it improves the training process, smooths the training, faster convergence. Added to it the gradients. So there was faster and better convergence, because there's the internal shifting which was happening is now reduced, is now taken care of. Added to it, it also has a regularization effect. This is what batch normalization does. Now, the original paper states batch normalization should be placed before the activation function. So I was reading where should I call the batch normalization function. These are the Stack Overflow articles. So as per the official paper, batch normalization should be placed before the activation, and most of the implementations which are available on the internet, most of the official implementations which are available on the internet have placed batch normalization before the activation function. However, some argue that after activation you are again distorting the values and outputs, which might lead to internal covariance shift, and that is why some people have observed that placing the batch normalization after the activation functions leads to some better results. Also, this is one aspect, is how should you order batch normalization and dropout. Batch normalization should be, if it is placed, dropout should always be after the activation, right? So by that logic, batch normalization should be before the activation. This is something I don't want to discuss much, but what is something I want to discuss is, let's go through this article. I think I love this article. So this is all about understanding, right? So if you have high learning rates, batch normalization adapts to it. So let's go through the headlines. Internal covariance shift, we did discuss about it. So internal covariance shift, we would call it from now, when the input distribution to the layers is fluctuating, right? That would definitely happen. You're passing the batches. One batch might be might be a representative of some kind of data or distribution, whereas the other batch might be representative of some other kind of data or a batch. So that is what they call by shift. Covariate here. What is it? Internal means part of that fluctuation is happening in the intermediate layers of the neural network, the hidden layers of the neural network. Covariate part refers to the fact that distributions are parameterized by weights that vary each other shift whilst that distribution is changing. Yep. Why internal covariance shift is even a thing. So this, I'll not read the article. So this is the diagram. This is the diagram which talks about what internal covariance shift is. So this is, let's say this was normally distributed. This was normally distributed data. Then came a batch of data which follows this distribution. So following this distribution, what happens is once you have this as a loss function, or you might do this as a loss function. So different loss functions are possible for the first batch. And let's say the batch, the neural network adapted to either one of these. Now if there's a major shift from the initial batch which was supplied, then what we'll observe that there's a huge loss and there's a huge shift of the weights and other things, which distorts the training. So the reason ICS ends up screwing at learning is that our neural network always perform better on denser regions of the input distribution. The loss for points in denser region is reduced more as the data points in the denser region dominate the average loss. Then we have the normalizing the inputs. Minor fluctuation in weights more than 20 odd layers can produce big changes in the distribution of the input being fed to deeper layer even if the input is being normalized. So then comes batch normalization. These are the equations we saw in the original paper. So debunking the myth of ICS. This is what I wanted to discuss. The paper introduced batch normalization to the world, attributed its success to the fact that it get rid of ICS. However, that is a fallacious statement that batch normalization does not prevent ICS at all. ICS is precisely the input distribution changing as we train our network. Batch normalization has parameters gamma and beta for adjusting the mean and the variance of the activations. However, it does not mean that these hyperparameters are trained. They also change, and batch normal is inherently causing a changing distribution of the activations or internal covariance shift. Had it prevented internal covariance shift, the hyperparameters make no sense. Yeah, this is not preventing internal covariance shift, because internal covariance shift will happen. What it does is it is adapting itself to internal covariance shift. So what does batch normalization do? At this point I must remind who's that? Let us see. So deep neural networks having higher order of interaction, which means changing weights of one layer may also affect the statistics of other layer in addition to the loss function. These cross-layer interactions, when unaccounted, lead to internal covariance shift. Yes, that is the outcome of what we were talking about. So if you have a data distribution which is different from the previous data distributions, then the weights of the internal layers would change, and the weight of previous layer determines the weights of the subsequent layers. So that is how internal covariance shift happens. Exactly, right? However, when we add batch normalized layer between the layers, the statistics of a layer are only affected by the hyperparameters gamma and beta, and that is how you are countering the effect of internal shift. Now our optimization, how does this help in faster convergence and better training? Has only to adjust on two parameters, hyperparameters, to control the statistics of any layer rather than the entire weights of the previous layer. This greatly speeds up convergence, avoids the need for careful initialization of hyperparameter tuning. Therefore, batch norm acts as a more like a checking point mechanism. Before and after we discussed, and as a regularizer as well. Now there's one more thing I would like to discuss, like for fine tuning or anything, batch normalization should be put as false. You should not, while fine tuning or while pre-training your network, you should not fine tune or pre-train the batch normalization layers. We'll discuss why it is in the next session. This is another good article which I found. So what does batch normalization do? Makes the training much faster and more stable. Instead of normalization, it consists of normalizing activation vectors from hidden layers using the first and second statistical moments of the current batch applied right before or right after the nonlinear function. All the current deep learning net frameworks have already implemented the methods of batch normalization. It is usually used as a module which could be inserted as a standard layer in deep neural network. Yes, you can directly use batch normalization as a module, tf.keras.layers.batch normalization, and so parallel implementation exists for PyTorch. Right now, a better understanding. So while training at each hidden layer, batch normalization transfer the signal as follows. You find the batch mean of the batch, you find the various standard deviation of the batch, you find z normal, and then you find this equation z. Normalizes the activation vector z with 3. This way each neuron's output follows a standard normal distribution across the batch. So let's say these were the inputs to this layer, these were the different distributions for the inputs. After batch normalization, all of it would be transformed to a normal distribution. So basically idea is the more the similar the data is, the more the data is belonging, the better the distribution is. So why do we standardize the inputs? Like in image classification problems, you would always divide by 255 for RGB scales. Why? The reason being, the more standardly distributed the data is, like if it is from 0 to 1, the better and the faster training. So that is what this particular does. So why should I limit myself to the input part only? Let us extend ourselves to the internal hidden layers. And if you get into the internal hidden layers, that is what this batch normalization is trying to do. I might be able to control the inputs, but what happens if beyond the input? If the data distribution changes, then the internal distribution of the weights or how those are treated would also change. So by using a batch normalization layer, I'm able to work upon it. So we have two parameters. Such step allows the models to choose the optimum distribution for each hidden layer by adjusting two parameters. Gamma allows to adjust the standard deviation, beta allows to adjust the bias, shifting the curve to right and left. Perfect. The reasons explaining batch normalization layers effectiveness are subjected to misunderstanding, and this is disapproved of self-heterogeneous hypothesis, improving the community's understanding of this method. Evaluation. Unlike training phase, you may not have a full batch to feed into the model during the evaluation phase. Yeah, so in the what happens is, while evaluation phase, that is what I said. In evaluation phase, you need the values which were obtained during the training phase are used. So is the case when you are using the transfer learning method. In practice is something you must have done. Experimentation we won't be doing, right? Yeah, so as stated, batch normalization is widely used because it makes the deep learning models perform much better. And then we have, I think these are the experiments results. Faster and better convergence, higher learning rate without compromising convergence. That is what it says. And how many times higher? 30 times higher learning rate than the original one. Notice that 5 times makes the vanilla network diverge. Absolutely. So sigmoid based model reached competitive results. Well, we need to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. We can clearly see that we get slightly better performance with LO based models with sigmoid. Said before batch normalization, we thought it was almost impossible to efficiently train deep networks with sigmoid in hidden layers. We considered several approaches to tackle training instability, such as looking for better initialization, and these pieces of solution were heavily heuristic and way too fragile to be satisfactory. Batch normalization makes those unstable networks trainable. Now we understand why batch normalization had such an important impact on the deep learning field. An overview of the batch normalization benefits on the training performances. Is there any side effect? In practice, we shouldn't rely on batch normalization to avoid overfitting. put aside, we should always make sure that one module addresses one issue. Relying on several modules to deal with different problems makes the development process more difficult than needed. Still, it is interesting to be aware of the regularization effect. It could, as explains, the unexpected behavior from a network. Greater the batch, lesser the regularization, as it reduces the noise impact. Yeah, so best way to counter regularization effect is to have a greater batch size conditioned your RAM memory supports. If your RAM memory does not support, you need to adjust for greater regularization methods. So basically such transformation adds noise, and these kind of noise might be the side effects. So to counter these kind of noise, what you can do is increase the batch size. So the only side effect is noise, which might be there due to the kind of transformation we are doing. And if you want to counter that kind of noise, all you can do is increase the batch size. Now normalization during the evaluation, this, perfect. What else we have here? Before and after we did discuss. So somebody who wrote a code by the name of Christian KZD applies ReLU before batch normalization. Basically batch normalization after the activation. However, in the official implementations, we have seen batch normalization placed right before the nonlinear activation. Experiment wise, many of the cases batch normalization after the activation has performed better. Some say that it is case dependent, some say that no, this is the absolute logic. We have discussed how it works. Let us see again. So first original paper, that is what we discussed in the previous article here. That original paper talks about internal covariance shift. Then another paper came which refutes the idea of internal covariance shifts and talks about the inter-layer dependency. And then another paper came on batch normalization, which talks about the optimization landscape smoothness. So these are the three different perspectives. So what is internal covariance shift? Shifting of a model input distribution. By extension, internal covariance describes the phenomena happens in hidden layers. Does this image contain a car? If you want to extract all the car images from a very large unlabeled data, such a model would save a huge amount of time. We would have RGB as input. Follow this output would have a single value describing the properties. To summary, we need a significant amount of labeled data. Now assuming we have common cars for training, how would the model react if we were to classify a Formula 1 car? In this example, there is a shift between the training and testing distribution. More broadly, the different car orientation, lighting or weather condition would be enough to impact a model performance. A model does not generalize well. So let us assume the crosses describe features or social feature do not contain any car rings and this. From model point of view, training images are statistically too different from testing images. This is covariance shift. So covariance shift is like from model point of view, if the training images are statistically quite different from the testing images and you observed a drop in the testing performance, that can be attributed to the reason the training images were statistically different from the testing images, and that is what you call it data drifting, or what they call as covariance shift. Now internal covariance shift is usually for the hidden layers. Make some neurons react with a more comparable distribution for any wheel orientations. The optimizer will have trouble generalizing well. This is what it talks about. The following hypothesis is now outdated. A lot of content about batch normalization still claim that reason that makes method work in practice, yet several recent works have challenged it. This is something we have already discussed. Let us proceed to the conclusion. Batch normalization is one of the most advances in the field of deep learning to successive linear transformation Relying on two successive linear transformations, this method makes deep learning neural network train faster and more stable. Reduction of interdependence between the layers. So basically, it does many things. What I can understand is it does many things. Interdependence between the hidden layers is reduced. So optimization landscape is smooth, and ICS might be tackled. No matter what it is, your training performance increases to a greater extent, and whether to put it before and after. So conclusion part is training performance improves a lot if you use patch normalization layer, and it is dependent. So some of the official implementations have placed it right before the activation. Some of it has placed right after the activation. Whether to place it before or after the activation depends on you. So it's better to try out both the methods. And another thing is you can start with a higher learning rate that would help in faster convergence, and or skipping the local optimas. Added to it while testing or while transfer learning. You need not to use patch normalization layers, or those can be frozen to the values they have learned. That's it. That concludes today's session. Hope you learned something of value, and please do hit the subscribe button, do hit the like button, and do share any content or topic you would love to discuss with me, or you would like I should bring it up in one of my weekly sessions. Alright, till then, take care, bye bye, and do hit the subscribe button.